I'm Paul Elliott, here with Eric Hodel, who is one of the oldest living Rubyists, aside from Matt's, of course. So you've been doing Ruby since 2001.
Yes.
Right. What are some of the big changes that you've seen in the community over the years?
I'd say that before Rails started, a lot of the talk about Ruby happened on the Ruby mailing list, the Ruby Talk mailing list, and there was a lot of traffic. And then as Rails became more popular, a lot of that traffic drifted off of the mailing list. And so it used to be very difficult to go and keep up with the mailing list. That was where people went to ask questions. How do I do this? Why does this not work? How can I make this work with Ruby? And I think now that that's all moved off into forum sites and Stack Overflow and blogs, and so there are many more resources now to go and figure out how to learn Ruby, and many more places to go and find out how you go and use this gem or that gem. And I think that's in some ways that's good because we have more ways to learn. But it used to be that you could find the author of almost any Ruby package in one spot. And so now it's much more difficult to go and figure out how to go and get in contact with the person you need to.
Yeah. So with Ruby 1.9.3 and of course 1.9.2 gaining a lot of popularity, what are some of the exciting features that are part of that people may not really know about, that aren't out in the mainstream?
There's a lot of hidden additional standard library stuff that I'm still discovering or discovering how to use. Enumerable has gotten much more easier to use, and you can now create an enumerator for any method. So you can go and provide a little line. It's return enum4 __ method _ if unless block given. And then when you call this method, you don't provide a block, you get an enumerator object back. You can map on that or select or any of the enumerable operations. So now instead of having to provide each and include enumerable like in the earlier 1.8 days, you can just have enumerators everywhere, which really makes programming with collections much more natural and simple, and it looks like all the rest of the Ruby code you use. So that one's I think my favorite is the expansion of that.
Cool. Now, how has the newer versions of Ruby changed Ruby gems? Has the new features and things impacted your code base very much? Since I'm maintaining backwards compatibility back to 1.8.7 with a lot of stuff, I can't go and take advantage of every new feature. But as a bunch of important stuff was backported to 1.8.7, so I can take advantage of things like the enumerators will still work in 1.8.7 for the most part. You don't get this. There's some of the methods are missing that are only 1.9. But for the most part, it's not been a big change as far as changes I've needed to make or changes that I've wanted to make. Okay. Now back to being a Rubyist since 2001. These days, when you ask people why they switched to Ruby, it's usually because of Rails. Back then, of course, Rails didn't exist. What was your big motivator to switch to Ruby?
So before that, I was actually in college when I was first learned about Ruby, and I was trying to do some web stuff, and I wanted to do some object-oriented programming. And I didn't really like Python too much, and I don't know if you even knew about Python, but I was trying to do OO Perl, and it was just terrible. You take a hash and you treat it like it's an object, and it didn't make much sense. And then as I was trying to figure that stuff out in Perl, I learned about Ruby, and it actually had all the object-oriented stuff. It was consistent and clean, and you could figure out what one thing did based on what the previous things did. And so after that, I was hooked.
Cool. So back in 2002, I imagine Rubyconf was a much smaller thing than it is now.
Yes.
How was the feel of the conference back then?
So actually since Rubyconf was in Seattle where I live, I actually went and picked up Matt's from the airport.
Nice.
And so I have a 1978 Mercury station wagon, which is this huge red, it's amazing automobile. And so I go to the airport and I get him in my car, and I didn't know what hotel to take him to, so I drove him to my house. And I gave him Ethernet and water. He didn't want a chair. He just kind of squatted on the floor and jacked in, and then he was happy until Dave Black came, and I could figure out where to go and take Matt so he could check into his hotel. Also, the conference was very tiny. I believe it was around 60 people, and it fit in one small room.
Oh, wow.
And so there were, Dave Thomas was there, Rich Kilmer, Jim, Chad. Chad may not have been there yet. Yeah, so it was, and there was only one track, of course. So yeah, very, very small and intimate.
Cool, cool. That's great. Yeah, it's definitely changed a lot. The recent Rubyconfs, of course, are pretty big, pretty popular. Great. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
You're welcome.
And it was great meeting you.